Hi guys. We had a look at the tax, and now we're going to have a look at two, well, you like to call them taxes, but they're something totally different. Universal Social Charge, or USC for short, and Pay Related Social Insurance, or PRSI for short. Okay, now, unlike taxes, these are meant to be there for a reason. Okay, universal social charge was brought in as an emergency, for want of a better word, charge or tax years ago during the crash. Okay, everyone was meant to pay it, and it was meant to be, very punitive, but temporary. Of course, it's not temporary; it's still here. PRSI has been around forever. PRSI was meant to cover things like your hospital, so you wouldn't have to pay going into the hospital. But yeah, everyone does pay to go to hospital. Your free dentist, your free eyes, your free ears. You've been able to retire and at 65 and live a good life, be a pensioner, not be poor when you're a pension. It was meant to cover if you had unemployment and all that type of stuff. It's meant to cover all that, the PRSI. Okay, so let me show you how it works. Okay, and you'll see how unfair it is, in my opinion. Okay, so we'll start with the universal social charge. Remember our little story where we have our box, and our box gets split into two, and then our two gets split at 20% and at 40%. Okay, remember that story? Well, forget all that story. Before any of that happens, and that all does happen, but whatever number you started off with here, the USC and the PRSI are taken out of that, and then you still go through all the rest of the stuff. So you look at my previous video, that all happens on top of these two numbers being generated from that number. It's not a case you take those two numbers out and whatever's left over goes through this process. No. If you start with 100,000 here, you do the USC on the 100,000, you do the PRSI on the 100,000, and then you do all your tax on the same 100,000. So let me show you how it works. Okay, so let's say I have 46,000. Okay, the USC works as follows. There's different methods of doing it, but I'm going to show you the most common. The first 12,012 euro. So the first 12,012 euro, you pay 0.5% in USC. Okay, sorry. Right, then from 12,012 euro up to 19,874 euro, you pay, you guessed it, 2% USC. And then from 19,874 up to 70,044, you pay, would you believe, 4.5% USC. And then from 70,044 up to infinity, you pay a whopping 8% USC. Now you're thinking to yourself, okay, well sure, I'll never see that. You'd be amazed how quickly you'll get to that number in your life. And imagine paying 8% off the top. You can see where this is going. So I'm going to show you how this 46,000 gets hit by the USC. So the first 12,012 euro at 5%. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do 12,012 euro multiplied by 5%, which is multiplied by 0.05. Okay, so I'm going to get my calculator and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to pay, that's what I pay, no matter what. That's 600 euro and 60 cents. So I have to pay that no matter what every year. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out the difference between these two numbers. So I'm going to do 19,874 minus 12,012, and I'm going to multiply that by 2%. Sorry, I made a mistake there on that one. That's 0.5%. So that's an extra decimal in there. So That's really €60.06. Okay, so get my calculator out. I'm going to go 19,874 minus 12,012 and multiply that answer by 2%, and it's 157.24. So already, look at the amount of USC, and I haven't even halfway there yet. Now, the next amount. So I'm in this next category. I don't have anything. I'm making 46,000 a year. So all I have to do is just take the amount I'm making, because it's under 70,000, from 19,874 and multiply it by 4.5%, 0.045. So that's going to be, let me do this here, 46,000 minus 19,874. And I'm going to multiply that by 4.5%. And that is €1,175.67. And if I add those three amounts up, and this is where you're going to need that calculator, lads. I owe a grand total of 1,392.97 USC. And what does that mean? It means that this amount will get taken from my net, along with the 46,000 at 20% and 40%, depending on my cutoff from the previous video. So if you can imagine the previous video, where have we got it here? That amount that I thought was the net, I'm going to have to take another 1,392 off it. Okay. And unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. The PRSI, it's not as complicated. PRSI for you is probably around 4%. It's usually 4%. So that's really 4,600 multiplied by 0.04, which is another 1840. So my net pay, which was 37,860, remember that was my net pay from the previous video. That was 46 grand at 20% and 40% with my tax credit. I'm going to take away from that my USC, which I worked out to be 1,392.97. And I'm going to take away my PRSI, which is 1840. So plus 1,392.97 minus 37,860. So really, I'm coming home with 34,627. So that's taking out the USC, the PRSI, the tax at 20%, the tax at 40%. That does not include if you have a private pension, which will come out of that on top of that. If you have any loans which might be attached, or you pay any of your other union subscriptions or anything else. So that thought you were making 46 grand, you're now only making 34.